I want to talk a little bit about enumerations. And here I have a simple public class tester, and now we are going to create our enumerations and see what they can do for us. Practically, enumerations are a list of things. When I say lists, I don't mean as our system collections generic lists. I mean that as a list of things actually. So you can list, I don't know, for example, pencils, pens, or whatever you like, weapons, shields. So let's see how that actually goes. Now, in order to declare an enumeration, we need to type it, well, outside of our class declaration. So we can type it above the class here or below the class, but we cannot type it inside of the class. So here we can say public enum, and let's say we named it weapons, and now we have our enumeration. So here we are going to have our weapons. And now we can add our lists of weapons that we want. So for example, we can have a no weapon actually have a none weapon. So here I'm going to say none, which will denote that we don't have a weapon. And let's say we can have, for example, a pistol, and we can have a rifle, and we can have a sword. So sword. And we can have some other stuff as a weapon. So practically this is how it goes. So you write whatever you want. Simply type none, then comma, then pistol, then comma, then rifle, then comma, sword, comma if you want to add more, so on and so forth. Practically in your own words, what you want to have in your enumeration, you can type it. And in order to use it, so here we can simply type it as a private weapons, and I'm going to name this one weapon, or we can make it public, so however you like it. And let's say here in our start function, so as a default, we can say here, for example, our weapon is equal to weapons.none. And we can compare our enumerations to each other in order to see if we have an equality or not. So we can say, for example, if our weapon is equal to weapons.none, then we can, debug.log in our console, and I can write something like the user has no weapons. So the user has no weapons. And we can go back in our Unity editor, and I have attached my tester script on my tester game object. If I run the game now, we are going to see the user has no weapons printed out in the console, because initially we are setting here our weapons to be equal to none. Then we are telling, or here we are comparing if it's equal actually to weapons none, then we don't have any weapons. We can say here, for example, our weapon is equal to weapons. So weapons dot, let's say pistol, for example. And here we can test if our weapon is equal to weapons.pistol, but in case of enumerations, we don't use a double pipe sign. We use a single pipe sign. So here we can also say if our weapon is equal to weapons. For example, rifle. So if this is true, if either of these are true, here I'm going to say the user has a gun as a weapon, because the user can also have a sword, which we declared right here. So in order to compare our enumerations and have an OR statement, we don't use double equal pipes. We simply use not double equal pipes. We don't use double pipes. Instead, we use a single pipe. So here we are setting our weapon to be equal to weapon pistol. So if our weapon is equal to weapon pistol or weapon rifle, then the user has a gun as a weapon. So if I run it now, we see that the user has a gun as a weapon. If I go back here and change it instead of weapon pistol to weapon rifle and go back here, I will clear the console and rerun it. And again, we see the user has a gun as a weapon. So we can go back here again, and I'm going to set the sword now. So now we have a sword, and we are not going to see anything being printed out in the console because, we have a sword. We can also test with the AND, operator, so to say. But in case of strings or integers, we use the double AND sign. But in our case for enumerations, we use a single AND sign. So don't forget to do that. So the same way as we are using a single pipe sign we are using a single and sign. So we can test if our weapon is equal to weapon pistol and our weapon is equal to something else, so on and so forth. If you have a situation where you need to test if both of the cases are true, then use a single and sign. What we can also do, so in our case here we have a sword. There's another way that we can test it out. So we can test it like this. So here we can say if our weapon and weapons.sword is equal to weapons.sword. So if this is true, and here we are going to say the user has a sword as a weapon. So here we are testing if our weapon and weapons sword, which is this one right here that we are setting, is equal to weapons sword. In our case is going to be true. So let's go and test it out. So if I run the game now, we see the user has a sword as a weapon. So practically we can test it in that way also. So this is in short regarding our enumerations. So enumerations can be anything that you want. So you can name them however you like. You declare them like this: public enum weapons, open curly bracket, close curly bracket, and then you add your enumerations in your own words, however you want to write it or whatever you want to write. It's up to you. So you can declare however you like it, as I said before, and then you can simply use them right here, and then you can declare them here and use them in your game. So as I said, this is a nice example, for example, well, nice example, for example, it's a nice reference or a nice sentence. Anyway, here you can use it, well, for weapons, and you can keep track of which weapons the user has. So he can have a none as a weapon, he can have a pistol, a rifle, sword, so on and so forth. But this was an introduction to enumerations.